That's our bells. We'll start off. Welcome everyone to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for the 11th of October 2022. The meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank all of you in the room today and welcome everyone watching via Council's social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Portfolio Leader, Councillor Carl, Councillors, the CEO, the General Manager of Planning and the Development Group. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabul and Jarowair peoples, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. Item number 2 is attendance and apologies. We have no apologies. We have a leave of absence for Councillor Carol Taylor. And we have one declaration from Councillor McDonald for item number 3.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The item number 3, CBD Heritage Incentive Policy, consideration of one application, 152 Harry Street, Toowoomba City. I request that it be minuted that I declared a declarable conflict of interest in relation to this matter at the Planning and Development meeting 7 December 2021, item number 3, 2.41 CBD Heritage Incentives Policy, consideration of one application and of Council's decision to allow me to participate in a decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter. As the relevant circumstances have not changed, I'll participate in a decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. We move to item number 3, which is the CBD Heritage Incentives Policy, and our Regional Heritage and Policy Architect, Peter Freeman, is going to take us through it. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Okay, we're here to consider one grant to the recommended applicant in accordance with the Council Policy 2.41 CBD Heritage Incentive Policy. Council established a policy to provide grants to financially assist owners of heritage listed buildings to undertake works which will improve the appearance of Main Street environments. Note that St Luke's Hall previously had benefited from a grant associated with repainting to part of exterior. In the previous case was the upper section, which I'll show on slides to explain that. These works were completed 20th October 2021. Bit of background about the Heritage Incentive Scheme. So that the scheme has been around since March 2014. The purpose of the policy is to financially assist owners of heritage places to undertake conservation works, but also the purpose is to improve Main Street environments. That involves Toowoomba CBD and selected townships in the region which are listed in the policy. So far, Council has approved funding for 20 applications since the policy commenced, and to date the total funding allocated has been just over $144,000. In terms of consultation, so Council was reached out to all owners of heritage listed places, through mailing and advertisements at various times. The policy, so as I say, it's also attracted media coverage in response to that, and there's information about the Heritage Centre Scheme on Council's website. In terms of this application, myself being the Council's Regional Heritage and Policy Architect, aka Heritage Advisor, had a meeting with the applicant to discuss the second part of the works, involving basically the lower part to the Church Hall, St Luke's Church Hall, and the application. So the repainting involved essentially similar to what the first application was for sympathetic paint colours. So basically it completes the external painting of St Luke's Hall. Note also another factor is that the owner applied for a state heritage exemption certificate, which was granted by the Department of Environment and Science, because the works not only involve repainting the initial works, but also repairs to elements such as gutters, and the exemption certificate also applies to the remaining repainting of the hall. In conclusion, I recommend that the application is approved and a grant is awarded for the repainting works. So now I'd like to run through the slides here, so that we'll go through that. So the first one here, sorry, we'll just go to the first page. So supporting information, St Luke's Hall. Okay, so that's open now, that's good. So the first page, so this shows where the site is. So St Luke's Hall is on the southern side of St Luke's Church, not far from where we are now, facing Ruffin Street. The painting works are eligible because the grant is located, the property is located in the mixed use zone. If we go to the next slide. So here the applicant has provided a colour schedule. This is consistent with the first application, so it involves colours that are sympathetic. So and it's basically replacing the existing paint colours for what we call in heritage terms like-for-like colours on the building. So these are a select number of colours ranging from dark green, light cream, and a few browns, which you'll see on the next slides. So if we go to the next one, so we'll just go to the next again. So this shows one of the main elevations here. So this shows the colours here. So what you'll see here is that, sorry, do I have a pointer, or we don't have a pointer? Okay, so the building, the upper level, has previously been repainted. And the first line of gutters, so if you look at sort of the front part, the projecting part of the buildings, you'd see a line of gutters for the lower gables extending from one side to the other of all those gables there. So from that level of gutters going down, that involves in new repainting, which continues right around the building. So I'll go to the next slide. So this shows, one of the ends of the building here. So again, just showing those areas where you've got the light cream, you've got the green for the windows, and then you've got the sort of the deep sort of mauve/red for the lower section here. Go to the next slide. Again, just completing, sort of going to the other. This is on the southern side of the building. And that's the back part of the building. And these are just show some of the sort of detailing elements. So where the gutters are, they're galvanised gutters, but they'll be repainted green in keeping with the other green gutters. So, and again, showing some details there with the gables where the gutters will be repainted. Okay, so yeah, so that concludes.
Thanks, Peter. You've done. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. Any questions? Councillor Carl and then Councillor McMahon.
Yes.
Madam Chair, if there's no questions, I'm happy to move.
Okay. Got a mover in a second.
In accordance with.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Carol Taylor seconded. I'll just take a couple of questions. Councillor McMahon and then Councillor Shine.
I'm also happy to second. Just wanted to ask through the policy, so they did a $10,000 grant for part of it, and then they're doing another $10,000 grant for another part of it. So we're happy with it being two different projects.
Well, happy. They're over different financial years. So we're satisfied that this involves, completing the project for repainting the exterior. So because they're in two different financial years, but they meet the basic requirements of the policy.
You're right. And just to follow up, Chair, I seem to remember we took this policy and had a look at it with the intent of changing the $10,000 limit. Is that, where are we up to with
So
that?
where we're up to at the moment is that the current policy remains in place, but this year the policy is due for review. So our council officers, we've including myself, have had a good look at the policy, and we're also having a stakeholder engagement session, which is actually happening this week, where we'll be providing a presentation and we'll be going through the policy and discussing where we feel there could be possible changes to the policy. And once we've had that stakeholder engagement session, we'll be coming back to you to let you know the outcome of that session and what the possibilities are for amending the scheme. So we'll be coming back to you in a future discussion about that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thanks. I think maybe painting something like this would cost a lot more now than in 2014, so I welcome that. But I think it's been moved and seconded. I'm happy to second it if it hasn't, Chair. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Carl and then Councillor Carol Taylor seconded, but Councillor Shine's got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Peter, for your presentation and for the work you are doing in this field in Toowoomba.
Thank you.
From a personal point of view, I certainly appreciate it, and generally in the community as well. Just a couple of questions, but just a curious, satisfied my curiosity. Do you know what the original colours were of that building, the outside of that building?
We're not sure. So what the original colours are, but the colours are consistent with the era in which the building was built. So paint colours, the fact that they are consistent, that's the main thing that we're satisfied with.
No doubt about that. You mentioned a state
heritage.
exemption or something. I take it it's registered with the state as a heritage building.
That's correct. So the building has been identified at a local level, but also at a state level. So that means that our planning scheme has a schedule of heritage places, which is on so that it's on that list of heritage places. But state heritage also have their own list of places which are considered to meet the state criteria, the state significance. So it's been identified by have significance at both a local and a state level.
Just on the top of your head, the CBD area for this purpose is bounded by, I don't know, West Street, James, perhaps, Union, Bridge, no?
Sorry.
I'm just wondering what the boundaries are for the CBD
So
for this purpose.
in terms of the eligibility, so off the top of my head, I'm not sure the exact streets, but it relates to the zones. So it's the, in this case, it's the peripheral areas outside of directly the CBD grid. So this is there are mixed zone areas around the CBD, which this is a part of.
And we don't have anything that covers buildings falling outside that CBD. This is peculiar to the CBD.
Correct. That's right. The intention with the policy is that it covers Main Street environments. Yeah. So I guess there has to be a line drawn according to what that is. So it was decided at the time, and for respect, I wasn't there when the initial policy was created, but it was decided that the two zones, so the what's it called, the city zone, the principal centre zone, and the mixed use zone for Toowoomba, and for other townships, I think it was the township zone, but they would cover most of the streets that are commercial in function, and that you have that sort of density of commercial buildings which form you know, the main, you know, sort of central streetscapes. But that's something we're looking at with the review of the policy, because fortunately you'll get other heritage buildings, like say Vasey House as an example, where Vasey Lodge, which is just outside. And another one is Harris House. So unfortunately they fall just outside of that zone. So while they're important buildings and they're not, you know, they're not dwellings, they're important early buildings, unfortunately they don't meet the eligibility in the current policy, because literally you're just walking across an intersection from where places are eligible in the mixed use zone to where they're not. So again, it's a challenge about how do you capture those sort of places that are iconic and important to the history, and which the community would like to be included. And I think, you know, in principle we would support that, but it's about how you draw that line, and we'll be having discussions with the community on Wednesday to consider. That's one of the issues we'll be considering.
Oh, no, that's reassuring that, yeah.
Yes.
Might increase that, yeah. No, thank you. Thanks for your help.
Thanks, councillor Shine. Jay, did you want to make a comment?
I think Peter's actually touched on all of that. Thank you, Madam Chair. That we were doing the consultation tomorrow night at 6:30, and we actually, Councillor Shine, you ask a very good question. We're aware that there's perhaps some parameters within the policy at the moment that aren't allowing some of the locally listed products such as Vasey Hall to benefit from this incentive policy, and we would like to have that conversation with the owners of these buildings. So that's why we've opened up the consultation tomorrow night to all the owners of our heritage buildings to come and have a conversation with us and workshop some of these ideas. We've got 4 key questions that we want to workshop with them around, you know, what are the opportunities for exploring changes to the policy, and what do they think about those ideas.
So Jay, just to be clear, if the general public wants to come along to that, it's on tomorrow night at the library at 6:30. Is that
That is right,
open
and
to
we
the
would
public?
welcome we would welcome
Okay, wonderful.
anybody who has a love or conversation around heritage. Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, you've got invited the new owner of Vasey Hall?
We have sent letters out to all owners of heritage places, so that would include, that should include the new owner. So that's recently been sent out, so advising them of the meeting.
It's going to be turned back into a private residence.
Okay, interesting. No further questions. Can I just ask, and I probably should know, about re-roofing? Is that...
So re-roofing would satisfy the eligibility. It's a very extensive galvanised iron roof, and the cost of re-roofing has been discussed with council over the years. So we're aware that the roof is in poor condition, probably at the end of its life. But I guess the 10,000 is probably a drop in the ocean compared to what the actual costs are for replacing this roof. So we can understand why that they've gone ahead with doing other works associated with the interior, which are probably more sort of manageable in terms of their budget. Hopefully with something major like the re-roofing, but there may be, a state heritage grant as well. I think they'll need all the assistance they can, because that'll be, will be probably by
huge.
far the most significant cost to replace the roof.
Okay, lovely. There's no further questions. We have a mover and a seconder that we approve the grant funding to an amount not exceeding $10,000 as requested by Dr. Don Stanley on behalf of the Anglican Parish of St Luke's, Toowoomba, undertaking portion of the painting at St Luke's Hall as described in the accompanying report. So all those in favour? It's carried. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Jane. Item number 4 is the proposed amendment, number 26, Toowoomba Regional Planning Scheme Interim Local Government Infrastructure Plan LGIP Amendment. Peter Barclay, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Quite a mouthful, the title of that report. Good morning, councillors. So item 4 is to consider submissions that were received on the interim LGIP amendment. It follows on from Council's decision back in July this year to undertake a interim amendment. And as outlined in the report, the main purpose of an interim amendment in this case is focused on really updating just the schedules of work and the plans for trunk infrastructure and supporting materials, so the cost and timing of infrastructure, and updating the network planning that's occurred since the LGIP was adopted by Council in 2017. One of the major issues associated with doing the interim, obviously, is consultation with the community, and as required, the interim amendment was publicly notified on the 30th of July and ran for 15 business days, which we're required to do. In addition to the statutory requirements, council officers also engaged with the department and walked them through what was intended with the interim amendment, and also picking up on issues raised in the meeting in July with council. We ensured that we did extensive engagement with the industry, and the groups that we engaged with are outlined in the report. I suppose it's worth noting that we actually did get feedback from the DIA following that process, that they were actually acknowledged the proactive and transparent approach that we undertook in doing that engagement. As you'll see in the report, 12 submissions were received during the submission period, and when you go through those, two major issues came out of that. One was associated, and the bulk of the submissions was really around the timing or location of infrastructure, and that was coming in from obviously planning consultants and developers themselves. I suppose it's worth noting that the scheduled work is a moving feast. Like, we're relying on ongoing network planning, so even some of the network planning that's coming into the scheduled works as we update it can be a couple of years old at any given time. So as noted in the submissions report, there's always an opportunity to review timing, location as applications come in through the development application process. So it's not fixed in stone, so there is flexibility in that process. As you'll see, attachment 2 contains the summaries of the submissions, and also I've included the actual submission following those summaries, and how we've then considered and recommending that we respond to those submissions. So the recommendations for council are threefold. One is obviously to consider the properly made submissions in the submissions report, recommending that council endorse the responses stated in the submissions report, and that's attachment 2, and the council adopt amendment number 26 to the regional planning scheme 2012 in the form of attachment 3 to 18.
Ms. Peter, questions? Councillor O'Shea?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, please, page 50, if I can, summary and response to submissions. Just wanted to comment or I suppose a response around, particularly I'm looking at submission number 1, so it's just around the request or submission about facilitating active transport, etc., etc. And just in the response, I know we sort of talk about how we're currently undertaking a range of active transport plans of policy development, etc., and that's still underway. Wouldn't what we've done and endorsed through our sustainable transport strategy essentially answer that? So, I mean, do they talk to each other in regards to I would have thought the answer to that lies within what we've endorsed through that sustainable transport strategy. I mean, whilst no change, I understand, can be made to the amendment in response, but I mean, is that one way we look at addressing that? Because I mean, that document speaks exactly to what this submission request is about, in my opinion.
That's certainly part of the puzzle. Like, I suppose having the strategic level direction that council's setting is vital for each of the networks. And we're seeing that now coming through in all the infrastructure networks. So we've got the open space strategy, we've got water visions, and we've got the sustainable transport strategy. So that sets the high level direction that council is looking for in its infrastructure. I suppose what that response is really getting at is that in order for things to find their way into our schedules of work, that it's needing that detailed planning, and that work is certainly occurring within transport planning and drainage. It was just a timing issue where some of the studies that they've actually already done and more work that they're progressing just hadn't come before council yet. So most of the work that it's finding its way into the schedule of work are the planning reports that come up before council. They get endorsed, and that then gives us, the ability to actually include those. So it's just that, I suppose, process of rigour that we're not just arbitrarily putting infrastructure projects into the schedule, because they then obviously inform council's long-term financial forecast and asset management programs. So we need that level of rigour coming from the network planning areas, that there's been network planning undertaken and approved by council that we can then take forward in the schedules of work.
Sorry, thanks. Just a follow up to that. So with these submissions, so just the response that's written in there, is that how so whoever puts through that submission, is that how they're responded? Is that the information they get, what we see in front of us here?
From the submitters?
Yeah.
So
our response to the submitter.
Sorry, beg pardon?
Our response to the submitter.
We haven't, until it's been considered by council, we haven't responded. So we've only acknowledged the submissions at this point. We can't move forward and give a formal response on the submissions until it's been considered by council.
So I suppose where I'm leading to is, would it be considered that in the response, we obviously provide them with the sustainable transport strategy? Because I would have thought what is in that document would actually answer that question.
Do you want to make a comment there, Michelle?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The submitters will get a copy of the full submission document here, and we can certainly add additional information about the sustainable transport. Peter has described that the sustainable transport really has that higher level planning. The level of detail that we require for the LGIP is actual details around the pieces of trunk infrastructure that make up that information, and that also needs to be costed because it contributes to the financial information that goes into the schedule of works. That in turn feeds into other projects such as the LGIP program of works in the capital. So it's that level of detail that is not quite available at this point in time, but we are working with ISG as part of the full amendment, the major amendment that we're doing in line with the planning scheme, to have that work advanced and progressed in that timely manner for that amendment. So yes, we can make that context available to the submitters.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. No, I understand the point you raised. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Shine?
Thanks, Chair. Just, matter of interest, I take it the submissions are a result of a review of the LGIP, which takes place every so often, and submissions are called for whenever a review or amendment is proposed. I take it.
That's correct. There's a statutory process that we have to follow when we do either an LGIP amendment, which is what we'll be undertaking alongside the planning scheme over the next 12 to 18 months, and when you do an interim amendment. So there's a prescribed period that you must go out and seek submissions for, and needs to be publicly notified. So a public notice in a locally circulating paper as a minimum, and then anything additional. So as I outlined in the report, we also sent information out through the PD alert, and it was available in every customer service centre. There was a public notice in every customer service centre, and amendment material was available for people to inspect if they so chose. But everything's online now too, so you tend to get a lot less of, you know, the face-to-face and more people just accessing it electronically. It was on council's website, obviously.
The submissions seem to be, you know, in the main quite specific and professional in their wording. I'm just wondering, is there a level of frustration with submitters that out of 12 none are successful, and is that the usual result of submissions being made over a long period of time? I'm not being critical of it because I don't know whether, you know, I presume the response is the best that we can do based on our expertise. But I was just wondering, it seems 12 out of 12 is remarkable, I would have thought, and if that's always the case, or mostly always the case, just wondering whether there's a level of frustration out there in the people concerned with this industry as a result of that, in your experience.
Yeah, I think the reality is it's a process of continual improvement. So we're certainly looking at ways that we can better engage with the industry on an ongoing basis. So little and often. So you try and iron out a lot of those issues before they become issues. But I think the reality is, like, we even had a case, you know, this morning we got a phone call from the person that submitted the number 12, and where they were saying thought there might be a better location, but they actually came back this morning and said, actually, we think where council's proposing it is, you know, actually pretty good. So there's always going to be a process of educating people about what the LGIP is, because I don't think it's well understood. So that's definitely something that we need to be working on. And I know something Michelle's very keen on doing is engaging with the community and the industry more regularly and doing fine-tuning of the LGIP rather than getting to 5 years and having to do this wholesale sort of amendment where it's sort of like everything comes out at once. So I think it's getting to what you're saying, is to try and just keep managing the issues at hand and refine it over time.
Right. Thank you.
Michelle, did you want to make a comment there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only other real thing that I wanted to sort of add is that often this is a point in time of information. And so there's a lot of effort goes into network planning by all of the network planners in the organisation that gets endorsed by council through various strategies that then gets assembled into a schedule of works, and it's a large amount of process involved in that. And for that reason, it can be a little bit time challenged, which is why we've been talking about the opportunity, once council has implemented the major amendment through the TRIP amendment, which is coming up, to look at more regular updates, working with our network planners on to keep that information on a more current and timely basis. Now, some of the reasons why they can become out of date is that development may proceed in a different way than what was originally anticipated. And often that development application process provides another avenue to ascertain and reassess the appropriateness and timeliness and the delivery of this infrastructure at that point in time as well. So this is I guess, works in concert with a number of other processes, whether they be strategic level processes, whether they be development application processes, and this is one level of information. The importance of this document and the LGIP is to give a level of direction and certainty to council as a deliverer of infrastructure, but also to the development industry and community and people who own land and wish to develop land, particularly around anticipated timing and expected nature of infrastructure, to help inform decisions about planning for growth. So that's the role of the LGIP, and it also has a financial implication for council in terms of considering its schedule of works and how that will roll out. But as I said, we are often updating our capital programming, and that comes through planning. So that will necessitate more regular reviews of the LGIP as a future process.
Thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've just got three, if I could. So the recent confidential update, which we won't discuss, how does that potentially affect what we're dealing with today?
You're referring to the water reservoir?
No. Maybe I'll leave that question. If we could go to Board Books 94, the local government mapping and tables, I note on there we've still got these incredibly high ultimate development figures, which in my view, and we did discuss it at the briefings, that these aren't achievable. And I look at, Toowoomba Central, the ultimate development, currently it's 14,000, we're going to take it up to 24,000. If you look at Highfields, it's currently 17,000 and it's going to go up to 47,000. These are all unachievable figures in my view. Clifton, 4,800 to 12,000. What are we going to do? Are we going to become a China? Because that's what you're going to have to do to achieve these figures, particularly Toowoomba CBD. We all want increased living in the CBD, but that figure is just not achievable unless you do go down the China look, which is multiple 10-storey accommodation blocks all around the CBD, which even then you're going to struggle to do it. So I really don't understand why we're going to endorse a document that has unreal or unachievable ultimate development figures in it. And I just worry that we're going to have a document in there that isn't achievable, and why would we do that?
So, General Manager, would you like me to ask Lau, or if Peter's going to comment there, or?
No.
So, Councillor Summerfield, as highlighted in this report and the report that went up to Council back in July, this being an interim LGIP amendment is very targeted. So it's the only parts of the LGIP that have been updated are revolve around the network planning, timing costings, and any associated extrinsic material. So we actually haven't touched any of the projections or assumptions underlying the LGIP. They're what went up in the original LGIP in 2017. So they actually relate back to projections that were developed back, I think, 2014. There's a large body of work going on right at this minute in terms of updating those projections. So once Council adopts the growth plan in December, we'll be using those targets as our headline projections that we then do work from the lot level and populate these tables with updated projections once we know what that preferred pattern of development looks like.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense to me. I appreciate that explanation. So then on Board Books 187, we have the mapping where we talk, the infrastructure mapping, where we talk about, where the water comes from and that sort of thing. And I noticed that on the southern maps, we don't have a reflection of the water coming from the dams on that moving forward. And I would have thought that given that we'll either have our own southern pipeline or there'll be a Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline, both of them coming from the dams, that those maps should perhaps reflect that they'll have dam water. I might be wrong, that maybe these maps are what is currently rather than what the potential future is. Look forward to hearing. Thanks.
I suppose one of the challenges with the process where we have to produce these PDF maps is that they don't show obviously the entire network. So yes, we do have to show proposed and existing infrastructure, but I suppose in these PFTI maps it's just showing the sort of area where there's new works proposed. when it's on council's mapping system, so the intramaps, I mean, those existing networks are shown in the mapping, like the connections to the dams and whatnot are shown.
On the new maps or on the old maps?
If I might add some additional context to Peter's comments there. As I said, this is a point in time process, so it reflects the network planning that was done up to a certain date, and that predates conversations about the Southern Pipeline. That will then be incorporated in the TRIP amendment, and that network planning is still going through iterations about how that will roll out and other necessary infrastructure that might be associated with that. The other thing around the LGIP is it's a minimum of 10 years, but also a maximum of 15 years in terms of the infrastructure that goes into these plans. So I believe that to be more of a timing issue, and that work and investigation is still underway and will be reflected in the next iteration of the major amendment, the TRIP amendment.
Okay, thank you. Well, the Southern Pipeline that council plans to build, I believe the planning is still underway for that and has been for a number of years. So I just wonder whether documents like that need to have a date on them, because we need to understand at what date the information that's on there was.
So the information that is set out in the LGIP is also accompanied by a range of extrinsic materials which explains what planning sits behind this information that's been undertaken by the networks, and that is publicly available. But it really reflects that the planning has been done to a point at this time, and that there is an opportunity to always update the network planning as that is undertaken. The next major opportunity will be the TRIP amendment. I think one of the reasons that we should reflect on why this interim amendment has been proposed is around the timing of the Toowoomba Futures program. So with the growth plan being deferred and network planning already having been done to a certain point, we found ourselves in a position where our current LGIP, the schedule of works go out to 2026, and we're required to have a minimum of 10, maximum of 15-year time frame. So this really updates the network planning that has been done to this point in time and puts us in a position to inform those intervening years until the new amendment is completed and finalised by council. That process is in alignment with the figures and the new population projections that will come out of the growth plan and the development of the planning scheme. So they are working in harmony together. So that will be coming back to you, and that will be the major opportunity for all of the networks to significantly amend and update their planning to reflect those directions.
Thanks, Michelle. And the complexities of planning have always done my head in, I have to say. So I'm just going to take reassurance from yourself that we do not need to be amending these maps to include dam water for these southern towns, because even though these southern towns are going to get dam water one way or another. And I thank you and Peter for the report. However, if you have further discussions with Water and decide you want to amend them, there is opportunity before next Tuesday, should that be the case. Thanks.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Comment was in line with Councillor Shines. These submissions are quite specific individual issues in their nature, and I don't mean to nitpick, but the one I had a little bit of an issue with is number 4, this park at Veyro Blue Mountain Heights, Veyro Road, is it? And we decided that this land set aside for park was superfluous to our needs, and then we didn't need it, and so take it out. I suppose I appreciate, and I looked at the LGIP map that shows there's a park in Blue Mountain Heights, but urge caution in that. That's a growth area. We know there's a lot of stuff planned for that area, and once you build on your parkland, you never get it back. And you've got to really make sure you put it aside and call it a park at the start. And I appreciate that we've said, look, we don't need it, but it just doesn't sit right with me that in 30 years we might go, geez, there's houses everywhere, and that would have been a nice park there. And I appreciate this says it was a decision made by Parks and not you guys, but wondering if you could, to the information that you have, give my mind a bit of ease about that decision or that recommended decision. Thanks.
I think in terms of the parks planning, parks do comprehensive analysis of their demand over future years, and they assess that on a range of park needs. I think the Blue Mountain Heights area is an interesting one because it's also a lower density area, and so the likelihood of transitioning, particularly in a developed location, to a higher density is not as achievable, certainly within the ordinary circumstances and the indications of the growth plans. So as you have indicated, it has been a determination made by Parks. We rely on all of our networks to provide that information to us. There's been a comprehensive park strategy in this instance that's been endorsed by Council, so we would defer to their better judgment in this instance. But I guess the counter to that is that Blue Mountain Heights is certainly already a largely developed area and quite low density. As new developments, as they occur at a higher density, parks will be considered as part of those major subdivisions, as has been the case with places like the Habitat.
Thanks, Michelle.
Happy with that, Councillor McMahon? Yeah, Councillor Carl?
Yeah, thanks. A comment, if I may, Chair. Thanks, guys, for bringing forward an amendment, and thank you for your input, Lau. Have a very in-depth background in this particular field, but amendments are a lot of work, but they're actually really good, in my view, and that is that it allows us more accurate forecasting in our long-term financial sustainability, our asset management, our capital works program, a whole range of things as it falls out. And ultimately, it's our promise to the community on how accurately we deliver that and we forecast that and how we stay within our financial parameters. So I welcome these essential amendments, and I do hope, and it's not without a lot of work, a lot of input from stakeholders and a lot of input from staff to actually get us to this point. But I just probably, the word network planner is somewhat deceiving. Maybe it would be more readily grasped, not probably broader than this boardroom, is around network managers or asset managers or owners, because the strategic planning section doesn't actually get to, and Councillor Tim brought up a classic there around parks. The Parks and Gardens part of council are the network planners. They actually do their forecasting in conjunction with the planners, the strategic planning, who actually engage community, stakeholders, consultants to great lengths and that's why we've gone through a growth plan. So when we talk about network planners, we're talking about each and every section of council having input into the process of how we arrive at a position on an LGIP amendment. So I commend this to council, and I say it's a way forward rather than just doing a mass chunk at the end of the statutory time frame when there is potentially a lot more things out of date and less relevant. So that's why we do these amendments. So yeah, I'm happy to move at the appropriate time.
Councillor Shine, did you have a further question?
Just another question, if I might. Just in relation to that Bay Road one at Blue Mountain Heights, it's in my understanding of it, it's not required now for a park. So if it were required for a park, it would be in ownership of the regional council. It's now not required for a park. whose ownership does it revert to, and is there any consideration applying as a result of that?
So the land is still owned by the landowner. So the LGIP functions as indicating future infrastructure requirements. And should a development application proceed in that vicinity over time, council can then receive land for a park, for example, through that process. Alternatively, it can be proactive and go out and purchase in certain locations as well, generally under the park strategy. But at this point in time, it's not council's own land, is my understanding.
If I might just, I think some councillors here, including myself, would like to see that green belt between Highfields and Toowoomba preserved. That Vairo Park, Vairo Road area is sort of in that. Just wondering the implications of amending the LGIP. If a green belt is preserved, then there'll be less construction, less development, less infrastructure, is the word I suppose, required for that area. Is that a fair assumption or not?
Councillor Shine, I'm not entirely sure that I'm perhaps completely understanding your question, but if I could talk a little bit about the green belt. So the proposed growth strategy that was considered by council recently in terms of submissions and taking a hybrid approach does still maintain a green area between Highfields and Toowoomba. That won't be in public ownership. That would remain largely in private ownership. And so we, through that planning process, will need to consider what other forms of land uses may be acceptable or not acceptable in that location. It doesn't transcend that all green areas would then become publicly owned or would become a necessary requirement for public open space under the LGIP. Does that, perhaps you have something further that you wanted to ask around that I haven't quite grasped?
I'm not clear in my own mind really what relevance this has to the acquisition or preservation of a green belt. In terms of your explanation, in my view, it doesn't necessarily have to be, a green belt doesn't have to be publicly owned, but it might be zoned farming land or
correct. So in terms of the LGIP, it has no relevance to the green belt. The LGIP is for identifying key pieces of infrastructure as a result of the planning that's undertaken. That broader green belt may be required to be retained as a green belt for other reasons, such as ecological reasons or such as farming reasons or drainage buffers, all sorts of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that it would be required to come into public ownership because it's not really facilitating access to public recreation spaces which are met by other needs through the open space planning.
Councillor Carl, did you have a question?
Just on that same subject, but probably more a comment, just a little bit of local knowledge. I think Councillor Kerry, to his point, and I think you touched on it, Michelle, there are naturally constraints that will inhibit development. One is called the escarpment for a start, slope, drainage, landslip, environmental significance, a whole range of things. So any statutory body would be hard pressed to actually, at this stage and into the foreseeable future, do anything other than look at the escarpment and the way at which it's treated at this point in time. I can't see lots of things changing around some of those natural inhibitors, natural restraints that would see encroachment of development into the future. And therefore, I wouldn't even see the need for council to acquire unless there was a very specific reason. The council has done in the past more to the south for linkages and those sorts of things. And we talk about those corridors for the next 50, 100 years and amenity and those sorts of values that are very important to a growing community.
Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair, through you to Peter or Michelle. I'm just trying to, the first page of the document, page 33 in Board Books, talks about the interim amendment will, and then it's got 8 dot points, 7 dot points actually. Just talks about what this amendment actually does. So I guess where I'm coming from is that the LGIP's now that 10 to 15 years, and I'm just wondering whether, in your professional opinion, there is a change in the wings around the timeframes for these going to that length. The reason I say that is we adopted the LGIP in 2017, and yet the changes we're talking about have happened within 5 years. And we'll have an opportunity, I guess, with the full amendment that'll take place over the next couple of years. So it's we say extend the planning horizon for the networks to 2031, yet we'll have another full amendment in the next 2 years. So I'm just trying to explain to, so someone asked me the question, you've got all these amendments, an amendment happening, you've got a 2017 that finishes in effectively 2027 to 2032, 10 or 15 years, yet you've got a full amendment and then you've got another chance in 2031 to do another amendment. So when you line up a schedule of works and a capital works program now over a 10-year period that we do and a 3-year program of works, how closely are they aligned and linked to the capital works program when we're doing our budgets?
Thank you, Councillor McDonald, for your question. The provisions around an interim amendment are fairly recent changes in regulations. So prior to that, councils were required to review their LGIP every 5 years and consider whether any changes would be required, and if so, update it through an amendment. That was always a major amendment process. More recently, in the last, look, I can't recall the time frame, but in recent times, the legislation has been changed so that councils can do amendments of this nature, which allow us to more frequently update the planning information without making major adjustments to things like the planning assumptions and so forth. That would still be a major amendment. So it is designed to allow for more regular review and updating of the information, particularly around the schedule of works. And that is the linkage to the capital programming process. So we do work with finance and the asset managers in relation as to what's going into the capital program and how that's derived from this LGIP package of works to make sure that there is alignment with that. And that would occur regularly over, well, we do that each year, so we do review that. I think in terms of the time frame about the end date for the LGIP, as we do the review of the TRIP, we will review the planning assumptions and the time frame around that at the next step. And as Peter alluded to, I have a desire, once we have the major TRIP amendment in place, to be in a position to more regularly update our information. Now that this statutory process enables us to do that, we can take advantage of that and make sure that the capital works programming and the LGIP information are strongly aligned in that process.
If I could, thank you, Michelle. That makes perfect sense and is more of a contemporary modern environment, I would have thought, given the things that are coming at us at a rapid rate of knots. So, yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. Can I just ask a question, and it sort of really goes back to Councillor O'Shea's question earlier about the submitters. I was interested that submitter number 3 about the art hub at Crow's Nest. Like, is the process not understood? Like, why would we get something like that? And is 12 something that you would think that's a reasonable number to have got that number, or, you know, are you sort of disappointed, or?
I'm never disappointed with submissions because every submission is assessed on its merit and is given due consideration regardless of the number of submissions made. I guess an observation is in the past we've received very few submissions to LGIPs. So it is pleasing that this is of interest to people. It is one of the more complex areas of the planning legislation and the relationship to a whole range of other issues that are perhaps not normally in the realm of many people in the public. And I think that the level of information in these submissions reflects that there has been some professional observations provided through that process as well. And that to me shows the importance of also working in a proactive way, particularly with development industry and particularly as we develop the trip, to benefit from their information and observations and be able to provide that information back to other parts of the organisation to help refine and inform that planning. It's very difficult to always predict the number of submissions that we receive, but certainly this is an area where it's not a part of the planning scheme where a general member of the public would interact with on a regular basis. And it's more around when development is occurring or to help guide, for example, our capital program. So it's probably one that receives less public knowledge and exposure in the general community, but is vitally important, particularly to the development industry.
Well, I suppose just to that one then, like, so they'll get a response saying, you know, it's not really part of this process, but will then they be directed to another area of council where they might be able to assist them? Okay, fantastic.
Well, we would ordinarily distribute that information to the other areas of council ourselves, rather than relying on the submitter having to come back. We will certainly make that sure that information goes through to the right channels.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Any further questions? We have Councillor Carl moving, and can I have a seconder? Councillor McDonald. So does anyone want to go into debate? No? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. Wonderful, wonderful work. Item number 5 is proposed changes to Register of Cost Recovery Fees and Charges 2022-2023. Mary Partridge, thank you.
Good morning, councillors. So over the past 6 months, Development Services has undertaken a project to improve our understanding and the industry's understanding of the overlap between the Planning Act and the Building Act, pardon me, and to clarify council's role in the assessment of building works applications. During this project, it was identified that some minor amendments to the relevant fees and charges would be appropriate. These amendments seek to tidy up the fees associated with concurrence referral applications, where council is the referral agency in line with the findings of this project and the information given to the industry. Sorry, I've had a cold. Whilst there is one additional fee line recommended, this is merely to capture a referral trigger as per the planning regulations, which was not previously identified, and it just aligns with the existing concurrence referral application fees. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Summerfield?
Just a quick one, Madam Chair. Just the new one, the 1422, and you said it aligns with the other one above it. So that is all consistent, and we're not going to start getting feedback that it's an outrageous fee or anything like that.
I would hope not.
All fees are outrageous.
I know. That's why we've got to review them, Stuart.
It was, so within the Planning Regulation Schedule 9, which identifies when council is a referral agency for a building works application, there are 12 tables within that, which identify circumstances. This was a circumstance being Table 8, which was not previously identified and was identified during this project. So it aligned, we chose to align it with the others to stay consistent.
Thank you.
There's no further questions. Can I have someone move the recommendation that council adopt the proposed amendments of 2023-2023 Register of Cost Recovery Fees and Charges as per attachment 1? Councillor Carl, seconder. Councillor McMahon. Anyone debating? All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Danielle. Item number 6 is the Regional Development Statistics Report for August 2022. General Manager Summers, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I like that response. Basically, I'll provide the bones of the stats which relate to the key indicators in our economy over the last month, which new lots, sealed lots, houses and units. Basically, there's been certainly an increase in new lots approved, 97, compared to July, and sealed lots. We had 2 sealed, which is rather diminutive, and that compares to 11 last month. In terms of houses, that's fairly constant in terms of approvals of detached houses, 97 in July and 81 in August. Units, they're about the same too, really, 8 in July and 6 in August. Total building expenditure across the region has gone up a little bit from 293 million to $309 million in that month. Total value, sorry, that was number. They're the numbers of buildings. They're fairly impressive if it was dollars, but they're the numbers of houses. Total value has dropped a little bit, and it's gone from, in July, 63.3 million down to about $55 million, which would tend to indicate the probably less commercial and industrial approvals in that month, and more domestic, more maintenance and housing itself, which tends to generate a lower turnover of dollars in the month. The pipeline information is there for councillors as well, and I should have opened the page and didn't. Yeah, we have the total number of lots actually travelling through our pipeline at the moment is 919, and there's various stages in the process reflected in that table, and that table's opposite graph 3. Any questions, councillor?
Stuart, Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just in regard to that table, GM Summers, the operational works being constructed, 415 lots. That's a lot of work happening, civil works being done. Have you had any feedback from the sector in regard to getting materials? You know, is there a challenge for them to deliver those lots, operational works, to get them to that sealed stage?
That's ongoing. There's certainly a lot of workarounds now being sought, and also in terms of different piping standards are being looked at more closely than before, because concrete steel reinforced pipes are very difficult to get. There's a limited number of manufacturers in the market at the moment, and it doesn't look like that's going to change for the foreseeable future. However, I think the other side of it is the number of contractors actually in the market available to do the work. It's really interesting talking to the developers because they're somewhat panic struck sometimes when we ask for a bit more information or there's a bit of a delay at our end for whatever reason. That they're fearful that they're going to miss the window of opportunity with a contractor, that the contractor will go and commence work in another area or for another developer or for indeed council. And they will lose that opportunity and have to wait months for that time window to come back. So it's an interesting time, and there's a shortage, a desperate shortage in certain skill areas, particularly in that contracting area. The building of retaining walls, interestingly enough, is a very scarce skill around the traps. Which I think is a good thing myself, but anyway, it's a problem for the developers who are trying to get the lots into a shape where they can put the development on maintenance and then get the lot sealed. Sorry, that was a long-winded response to a fairly short question.
Mr Mayor?
I'm just wondering, Mr GM, if your staffing numbers are okay, if you're able to get the people you wanted. I've overheard a couple of conversations indicate clearly it's pretty tough to get building people, all that sort of thing now in your department. I'm just wondering how
Yes, again, that's very universal, especially engineers. You know, there's 30, possibly 40,000 engineers missing. There's an incredible shortage. We've in terms of planners and planning, the DA area have just recruited a couple of young planners and one more senior planner, thankfully. I think from Rockhampton or somewhere up north, we've managed to kidnap her from. But it's very difficult, very hard, and as a result, we're resorting in planning in particular to getting less experienced officers in jobs that probably should have a few more years under the belts of the people going into them. However, we have no choice, and it seems to be working okay, and these young people are coming out of the universities highly educated and, even more importantly, highly motivated. So we're getting there. But we really do have an issue with building surveyors and engineers in particular. The story about building surveyors is really frightening. They're retiring left, right and centre. I think there's about 3,000, I'm not sure it's across Queensland or Australia. And the average age is about 56, which is not a good omen for building certifiers, and there's only one university course in Queensland at the moment for that. So anyway.
And that's at our university. USQ, if I might, Madam Chair. USQ is the only Queensland university with spatial science and surveying, which is really very short-sighted of QUT to not continue that course.
And of course, the common resort is previous times when we had difficulties like this was to bring in more overseas people with the skills required. However, that's not working this time. They're not coming, but we do have probably a lot of people that are highly qualified but are not registered in Australia at this time, and maybe that's a source we need to look at more closely, how we can get those people skilled up in language in particular, but also their qualifications recognised, or them offered courses to bring those qualifications up to recognition level. But I mean, it's a great question, but gosh, the issue is still there.
Councillor Carol Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fact hasn't helped that there's been no skilled migration for a couple of years either. And 50% of the engineers that we use in Australia come from overseas. So possibly the same, and it's stripped through, but I think that's going to be reinstated fairly soon. So one hopes that will. There's been nothing for 2 years, so that's made a huge effect on many things, particularly engineers.
Sounds good. If this politics thing falls through for me, quantity surveying. My next plan B, by the sounds of it.
Quantity surveyors?
General Manager, can you make a comment on what you've seen or what you've heard about the measures that we've taken to try and stimulate housing in the region, particularly around the emerging communities level of assessment? Have you seen anything or heard? Is it being indicated in our...
I guess you could characterise it as a rumbling of feet. There's been a vote in terms of, I think, support for Council's initiative when you look at the emerging community land that's been purchased recently, or agreements to purchase put in, submitted, or indeed even agreements struck with owners of such land by development companies to develop land in concert with the current owners. So there's been a lot of furious activity going on in that area, which would normally be a precursor to applications being lodged, and in fact there has been a bit of an upturn in lodgements for DAs, but there will be more, we hope.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, Stuart. The recommendation is that the report of the General Manager Planning and Development Group on the regional development statistics for August 2022 be noted by Council. Can I have someone move that recommendation? Councillor Von Hoff, Mr Mayor, all those in favour? It's carried. And now I need someone to adjourn, move that the meeting is adjourned. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Melissa Taylor, all those in favour? Thank you. We're going to have a break now. Yep. 15 minutes.
Not sure. That's being held up. Well, we're not having a special meeting now. We're going to bring it to the 25th, the ordinary meeting, where we'll get Council to recommend that we cut part of that bit off and move it on so that we can get the benefit of that. Yeah, because it's holding things up. You know, like I said the other day, the timing from the state government is ridiculous. I mean, all these people have rushed out and made investments based on what Council's been doing, and they've been gazumped. It's just shocking. Oh, God, yes. We are. We'll pop the flag, even though it's a state government's bullshit.
Are we thinking about how we're going to handle that?
All right, councillors, we'll make a start. Here's Councillor Taylor. This is the Water and Waste Committee meeting for October. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank those of you who are in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone who's watching via Council's social media channels. I acknowledge Mayor Antonio, Deputy Mayor McDonald, Portfolio Lead Councillor Summerfield and all my colleagues in the room and the CEO. General Manager Platts is unwell today, so we have Jake. Thank you very much, Jake, for stepping in. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose song lines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabul and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Item number 2 on the agenda, we have no apologies, leave or absence or declarations of conflict of interest. If the last one changes as we go along, please just raise it and we'll deal with it. We move on to item number 3, the expression of interest procurement process for dam safety upgrade project. Over to you, please, Jake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Try and work out how to turn the microphone on. I'll prefer to stand rather than sit, if I may, or would you prefer if I sit?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Being a taller gentleman.
Whatever you're comfy with.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. General Manager.
It needs a little extension.
I'll do my best. It's not a night at the Logies, unfortunately, so we'll try and keep it above the line. Councillors, thank you and good morning. The purpose of this report is to seek a resolution to undertake an expressions of interest for the procurement process under section 228, subsection 3 of the Local Government Regulation 2012. This process will facilitate the most efficient delivery of the dam safety upgrade project for council. As part of the executive summary, dams are long life assets which require continual assessment, monitoring and maintenance to ensure they can provide water security for years to come. Council's dam safety upgrade project, which council is well aware, includes upgrades to council's referable dams to ensure their long-term viability so they can continue to safely pass excess volumes of water during periods of extreme rainfall, meet modern engineering design standards and comply with the safety requirements as set out in the Water Supply Safety and Reliability Act of 2008, or otherwise further known in this report as the Act. Crestbrook Dam and Kubi Dam are critical council assets which supply the drinking water to Toowoomba's communities and are referable under the Act. The dam upgrade works are required to meet council's obligations as set out under the Dam Safety Condition Schedule that was issued by the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, with the works legislated to be compliant with the Act by the 1st of October 2025. To enable council to meet the requirements of the dam upgrade timeline set by the Dam Safety Regulator, the project is seeking council's endorsement to utilise the expressions of interest EOI process as the initial stage for the procurement process for the multiple packages of work that will be required to successfully deliver the project. The reason for this recommendation is that the use of the EOI procurement process is in the public interest and will facilitate the most efficient and flexible engagement for the current and future construction market, of which General Manager Summers alluded to is quite difficult at this point in time, that the use of the EOI process as the initial stage will assist minimising the project risk to council by ensuring that suitably qualified contractors that possess the required specialist knowledge and experience to complete the works are shortlisted prior to being invited to submit a subsequent tender. I can go into further detail in the report if councillors wish, but I'm happy to take questions.
Get some questions. Okay, thanks so much, Jake. Questions, councillors. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through to Jake. Thank you very much, Jake. It certainly makes perfect sense from my reading. Have you, just by way of engaged, worked with the finance team, procurement, and how that fits under the Act and just making sure we can do what we're doing?
Absolutely. Through you, Madam Chair, we've engaged directly with Ms. Robin Gray, the Principal of Procure to Pay. Essentially, the Act requires, as we're aware, that council must go to public tender for all works, except this section where it says it may request expressions of interest, which enables council to engage with the market or let the market engage with council and express interest in a project to then facilitate shortlisting of competent tenderers before inviting a formal written tender from those shortlisted applicants.
Thank you.
Thanks, councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Summerfield? Oh, sorry, Mayor, did you?
I just think what's been put to us is a very logical, business-like step in the process, and I'm happy to move it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Summerfield.
Ditto to what the mayor said, and I'm happy to second it.
Okay, lovely. I think we might have one further questions from Councillor Shine.
Just as a matter of interest, are there many companies, firms who do this type of work? It's fairly unusual, isn't it? Or not?
Through Madam Chair, Councillor Shine, you're exactly correct. There are, we would be aiming to engage with what's called a top tier or tier one of the construction market. So these are the multinational companies which are have a capacity to deliver a project in the order of $200 odd million, which would require a substantial amount of capacity and a certain degree of experience in dealing with a project of this nature. Hence, why we would like to seek an expressions of interest, so that we are ensuring that those who are invited to tender possess those skills and expertise that are required to manage council's risk.
Okay, thanks very much, Jake. I've got a mover in Councillor Antonio, a seconder in Councillor Summerfield. Anyone wish to go into debate? If not, I'll go to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried without dissent. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much, Jake. And that concludes the meeting, 10:40. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Committee committee meeting for Toowoomba Regional Council for October. The meeting's open to the public and will be live streamed. I'd like to thank all of you in the room today and acknowledge anyone watching via Council's social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and our portfolio lead, Councillor Melissa Taylor, and the councillors. I'd like to open the meeting and note that we have no apologies, nil leave of absences, and we have no items on the committee meeting for this month. So I move to close the meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just resume the planning and development meeting, and I'll just need someone to move that we go into confidential. Councillor Von Hoff, Councillor Carol Taylor, all those in favour? right. Okay, so item number 9, the confidential development services planning and environment court appeals and compensation claims for September 2022. The recommendation is that we note the report. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Carl, Councillor Melissa Taylor, all those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Meeting is closed, 11:49.